Alright guys, so everybody was pinging me with messages and the video shut off. Anyway, so I start to maneuver this around, start to sink the motor down in. Alright, so this is where things get a little bit tricky every now and then. So we'll come back up just a little bit. Alright, now we can come back on point, come up just a little bit more.
You have no idea how hard it is not to help.
I know. I just want to show that this is literally a singular person job. It's not that complicated. You know, everybody loves to argue with me on things, and I'm cool with that. I invite dissension. So, what's holding us up is over here on the motor mount, which is no big deal. So, anytime the motor is tilted, let's say, you may run into some small issues, but what we're going to use is the actual radiator, or excuse me, bell housing stuff to get it in place. So, I'm going to pick up just a little bit on here. Notice the motor started to drop in place. So, push forward, put some forward pressure on it. Alright. So now, we're just going to get any transmission bolt. Slide it in place. All we're going to do on this side is just finger tighten this transmission bolt. Then we're going to find another transmission bolt. So we'll let me grab my little stool because I'm only so tall. So at this point, I'm just kind of playing the rock game, trying to get it going. There we go. All right. So once you've got it started, you can kind of start to maneuver things around, help yourself out. Even if you need to start using ratchet wrenches and things like that. This may be the point too where you want to actually crawl underneath the car and start lining up some of the underpinnings. The other bolts. So at this point, we're just gonna easy roll the trans bolts into place. So you can see this side starting to come down just a little bit and lock into place. Go over a little bit. So take a little bit of pressure off. Like I said, nobody said it was super easy. However, it's definitely not impossible. There we go. Now, once that's in place, it's helpful just to push your jack forward. Keep the pressure on. tighten this one back up. Get our ratchet wrench. Pop this down. Alright. So now at this point, we have 2 bolts in. Everything's good. Now, since we suspended the transmission on a jack stand, what I would want to do now, I'll get one more bolt in the passenger side. Do you have one?
In the Solstice.
Oh, it's in the car.
Okay.
That's fine. So I'm going to slide under the car real quick. I'm going to put 2 of the lower bolts in, so as we lift up, that we pull it off the jack stand below, it doesn't come apart. Now, when we're talking about the bolts themselves, the way that GM sets the bolts in here isn't exactly the most conducive to being helpful. So the bolt on the passenger side, highest portion there on the bell housing, you want to take that bolt and actually, it's got a back piece on it that you want to take off. You want to put that down on the bottom and swap those around to just a regular old cap head screw. The other thing you can do while you're down here, once you get this tightened up, is you can rotate your converter around and make sure that your converter is clear and not touching. That way you know that there's no issues, like on my 427 with the way the aftermarket cranks come back.
But if you have the stop in there, you can't do that.
Yeah, you may, it may end up being an issue. So at this point, for the sake of TV, I'm going to get these locked in. That way we can pick the whole system up. Can you come around this side, Jim, and just show the jack and how I have it? So if you guys look, I just have a piece of wood supporting the transmission, not on the pan, but on the actual bell housing brace. So now that I've put the lower 2 bell housing bolts in, we're going to go back to the front, pick up the motor. I'm going to remove this jack, and then that'll help us set these motor mounts in the right spot, and then we'll set those bolts. After that, though, we're pretty much free and clear to start resetting all of our bolts. So let me slide my fat ass out from underneath here. So we go up against the frame. So now as I come down, I'm going to look at where the motor mounts are. I'm going to move the motor, left and right until it sits down on those. Not with a ton of tension though, but just a little bit of tension. Now I gotta go over and check this side. So as I'm looking, I know that I got to kind of just see how it's still loose and give these just a little tap. This is why I leave everything loose. So I'll position those and take my little stool and the motor mount bolts. GM must have made these things out of glue and God knows what else, because trying to get them to hold position is a pain in the ass. And with this stuff being aftermarket, you may have to bust out some crowbars and move stuff around. The other thing is, at this moment, we haven't tightened up these motor mounts, so they're not in the squish position. So with that being said, it's going to sit further back versus if it was, shrunk in the seated position, it would sit up higher and be able to drop the motor down forward. So just some things to be cognizant of. And it's hot as hell in here, so I'm sweating. Now that we've got that motor mount started, have the other motor mount bolt. We need to use a little crowbar action. You see. Set the far side, which is going to drop right in, which is good news. Normally I would use air and run it all in, but right now we'll just get the motor completely seated. Just for keeping this video as short as possible. Nobody wants to see me slave away on this crap. So this is actually a good staging point. So there's a difference between your motor mount bolts and your transmission bolts. Transmission bolts are a little more rounded, but they're also different length. So if you look at these two, there's no input piece. So these are our motor mounts. These are our transmission bolts. And I need to grab it. And I'll be honest, I would much rather do this than pull apart the whole flipping front end here to put a cam in the damn car. But that's just me.
Insanity.
Yeah. Some people think that's I don't have to understand. So once you got those settled, you can drop the Motor down into place. And basically take the chains off and everything's good to go. That is it. Pretty easy.